everybody, and welcome to the Penelope Possum channel with me, your hostess, Penelope the Possum. Sorry I didn't stream Thursday. Just a lot of things have been happening lately, and I just genuinely didn't have the energy to do it. This little lady is a small part of the issues happening. She's getting a lot better, but she's still really, really sick. I have to give her medicine. I have to give her medicine twice a day. Every day. Yes, kitten. She's very small. This isn't Sherry, this is Louise. She's a new cat we just got. I wrestled her from beneath a lawnmower. Look how tiny. Absolutely minuscule. But she does look like Sherry, doesn't she? What's wrong with her? Upper respiratory infection. So I've been giving her oral antibiotics for her eyes, and lysine for cats. You haven't met her because she's brand new, brand spanking new. We just got her a couple weeks ago, I want to say. It was not in the plan to have 5 cats, but now we have 5 cats. So next time you come over, you'll see another cat. Other possible names to call her are Lulu and Luli. But right now it's just Louise. Because when we found her, she was very wheezy. And I started calling her Wheezy as a joke. Because I didn't know if we were going to end up keeping her or not. Nick suggested Louise. I know. Okay. Alright, baby. There you go. Yep, cat distribution system found us again. This is like the 3rd or 4th time. I scratched the ever-loving dickens out of my poor wrist and hand trying to wrestle her from underneath that lawnmower. We had a friend over of Explodos. He said I should have had welder's gloves, and I do have welder's gloves. I just did not have time to think of grabbing welder's gloves. I didn't even have time to think about putting on proper footwear. I slapped on some flip-flops, and that was a bad idea because we had to take her to the vet later on, and oh boy, my feet were very cold. Anyways, with her needing medication and her being such a young kitten, I've kind of been put at my wit's end. That and my period's about to start. I know, ew, gross. I have a period. We can all get over it. I'm a grown woman. We can all pretend to be grown-ups for a little while. But with this and the holidays and everything happening, it has been a lot on my plate. Thank you. But, here's the fun thing we're gonna do today. Yeah, I think everybody's had a busy week. We've all been busy. It's just some of us have different busy than others. finding this kitten's kind of put a different shine on things. Anyways, today we're going to be reading a creepypasta from our favorite creepypasta website, which is now called Night Scribe. We're reading The Russian Sleep Experiment by an unknown author. Or maybe that's their name. Maybe their name is the unknown author. Who knows? I believe, it says it's a 12-minute read, 4.7 stars, 31 hearts, 79 comments. Published on April 10th, 2013. Let's get right into it. I have heard a telling of this story before, and I know it gets a little fucked up. So be prepared for it to get a little fucked up. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed-circuit cameras, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep on, but no bedding, running water, toilet, and enough dry food to last all 5 over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Oof. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised falsely that they would be freed if they had submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past. And the general tone of their conversations took on a darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they were and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternatively whispering into the microphones and one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think that they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity with them. At first, the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber, repeatedly yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. Continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior is how the other captives reacted to it. Or rather, didn't react to it. They continued whispering into the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped, so did the whispering to the microphones. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen that 5 people would consume at very heavy levels of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th days, the researchers did something said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used an intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives. They were afraid they were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calmer voice response. "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out amongst the researchers in the facility. Debate broke out among the researchers and military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air. Immediately, voices from the microphones began to object. 3 voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of loved ones, to return the gas back on. The chamber was opened, and soldiers were sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state that any of them in life. Rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead subjects' thighs and chests stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth, as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the rib cage of all 4 test subjects had been removed, while the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place. The skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the rib cage. All blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor. Fanning out around the room, the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. Quickly became apparent that they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subject. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber and alternatively begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another of the 5 soldiers lost their lives, if you count ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen rupture and bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arm of one doctor. When the heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out to the point where there was more air in his vascular system than blood, even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach, just repeating the word more over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to medical facility. The 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begged for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found he was effectively immune to the sedative they had given him to prepare the surgery. He fought furiously against his restraint. When the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under, he managed to tear most of the way through for a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, and even through the weight of a 200-pound soldier holding that wrist as well. It only took a little more anesthetic to put him under. Then the instant his eyelids fluttered closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal level of oxygen. His muscles were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in a struggle not to be subdued. Most of them were from force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed, and he was unable to beg or object to surgery. He only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested reluctantly they try the surgery without anesthetic. He did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure, replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it would be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so that the patient could write his message. It was simple: keep cutting. The other 2 test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well, although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could We follow the attention researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time. They were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given: I must remain awake. All 3 subjects' restraints were reinforced, and they were placed back into the chamber, awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors, having failed the stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, an ex-KPG, instead saw potential. He wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all 3 stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious at this point all 3 were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bounds with all his might. First left, then right, then left again, for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired for the EEG, most of the researchers were monitoring his brainwaves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering brain death and before returning to normal. They focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave water. Only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed that of deep sleep, and then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flat lines as the one who just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed his gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room. I won't be locked in here with these things. Not with you, he screamed at the man strapped to the table. What are you? He demanded. I must know. The subject smiled. Have you forgotten so easily? The subject asked. We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds at night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go into the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread. The researcher paused and aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject choked out, so nearly free. And that was the Russian sleep experiment. I distinctly remember that being a lot worse than it actually was. I think we have enough. Yeah, it was pretty whack. But I wouldn't say it's out of, character. Excuse me. Yeah, I said it was going to be pretty brutal. We're gonna read Mr. Widemouth. I remember hearing this long time ago. Very long ago. During my childhood, my family was like a drop of water in a vast river, never remaining in one location for long. We settled in Rhode Island when I was 8. And there we remained until I went to college in Colorado Springs. Yeah, it was brutal. I remember that being one of the more brutal creepypastas long time ago, back when Jeff the Killer was one of the most popular creepypastas in the world. That this suddenly changed the whole creepypasta sphere into what it's become today. The worst part is you can almost imagine something like that actually happening. Back in World War II, especially in Russia. I don't know, man. It doesn't seem too far off base. Anyways. Most of my memories are rooted in Rhode Island, but there are fragments in the attic of my brain which belong to the various homes which I lived when I was much younger. Excuse me. Most of these memories are unclear and pointless. Chasing after another boy in the backyard of a house in North Carolina. Trying to build a raft to float on the creek behind the apartment we rented in Pennsylvania, and so on. But there is one set of memories which remains as clear as glass, as though they were just made yesterday. Excuse me. Oof. Bit of heartburn. One moment. I ate some fried chicken and french fries earlier and they don't want to sit in my stomach well. I often wonder whether these memories are simply lucid dreams. Yeah, it sucks, but what can you do? I'm 27. I shouldn't be eating fried food anyways. Yeah, the honest truth is I just been having a little bit of stomach troubles. It happens. Life moves on. I often wonder whether these memories are simply lucid dreams produced by the long sickness I experienced that spring, but in my heart I know they are real. Yeah, it's funny. Life happens, we get older, our stomachs don't want to work with us anymore. Such is life. Oh my goodness, you just can't today, can you? We were living in a house just outside the bustling metropolis of New Vineyard, Maine. Population 643. It was a large structure, especially for a family of 3. There were a number of rooms that I didn't see in the 5 months we resided there. In some ways, it was a waste of space, but it was the only house on the market at the time, at least within an hour's commute of my father's place of work. The day after my 5th birthday, attended by my parents alone. Ouch! I think a lot of us have been there, having a birthday party where only our parents or immediate family attended. But I can imagine that this kid probably had a lot of lonely birthday parties. I came down with a fever. The doctor said I had mononucleosis, which meant no rough play and more fever for at least 3 weeks. Yep. I think every person on planet Earth has at least one birthday party they can remember where no one was able to attend except for maybe their parents and siblings if they had them. It was horrible timing to be bedridden. We were in the process of packing our things to move to Pennsylvania, and most of my things were already placed away in boxes, leaving my room barren. My mother brought me ginger ale and books to read several times a day, and these served to be my primary form of entertainment for the next few weeks. Boredom always lived just around the corner, waiting to rear its ugly head and compound my misery. I don't exactly recall how I met Mr. Widemouth, but I think it was about a week after I was diagnosed with mono. My first memory of the small creature was asking him if he had a name. He told me to call him Mr. Widemouth because his mouth was large. In fact, everything about him was large in comparison to his body. His head, his eyes, his crooked ears, but his mouth was by far the largest. You kind of look like a Furby, I said as he flipped through one of my books. Mr. Widemouth stopped and gave me a puzzled look. Furby? What's a Furby? He asked. I shrugged. I shrugged. You know. The little robot with the big ears, you can pet and feed him almost like a real pet. Oh, Mr. Widemouth resumed his activity. You don't need one of those. They aren't the same thing as having a real friend. I remember Mr. Widemouth disappearing every time my mother stopped by to check in on me. I lay under your bed, he later explained. I don't want your parents to see me because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore. We didn't do much during those first days. Mr. Widemouth just looked at my books, fascinated by the stories and pictures they contained. On the third or fourth morning after I met him, he greeted me with a large smile on his face. I have a new game we can play, he said. We have to wait till after your mother comes to check on you, 'cause she can't see us play it. It's a secret game. After my mother delivered more books and soda at the usual time, Mr. Widemouth slipped from under the bed and tugged my hand. We have to go to the room at the end of this hallway, he said. I objected at first. My parents had forbidden me to leave my bed without their permission, but Mr. Widemouth persisted till I gave in. The room in question had no furniture or wallpaper. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across the room and gave the window a firm push, flinging it open. He then beckoned me to look out at the ground below. We were on the second story of the house, but it was on a hill, and from this angle, the drop was further than 2 stories due to the incline. I would like to reread that. And from this angle, the drop was further than 2 stories due to the incline. I like to play pretend up here, Mr. Widemouth explained. I pretend there's a big, soft trampoline below this window. I jump. If you pretend hard enough, you bounce back up like a feather. I want you to try. I was a 5-year-old with a fever, so only a hint of skepticism darted through my thoughts as I looked down and considered the possibility. It's a long drop, I said. But that's all part of the fun. It wouldn't be fun if it was only a short drop. If it were that way, you might as well just bounce on a real trampoline. I toyed with the idea, picturing myself falling through thin air only to bounce back to the window on something unseen by human eyes. But the realist in me prevailed. Maybe some other time, I said. I don't know if I have enough. Hi.
Hey.
I read.
Oh.
Yeah.
There's a very tiny sleepy thing over there.
I know. I didn't wake you up, did I?
No.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. Where was I? Yes. I don't know if I have enough imagination. I could get hurt. Mr. Whitemouth's face contorted into a snarl, but only for a moment. Anger gave way to disappointment. "If you say so," he said. He spent the rest of the day under my bed, quiet as a mouse. The following morning, Mr. Whitemouth arrived holding a small box. "I want to teach you how to juggle," he said. "Here's some things you can use to practice before I start giving you lessons." I looked in the box. It was full of knives. "My parents will kill me," I shouted, horrified that Mr. Whitemouth had brought knives into my room, objects that my parents would never allow me to touch. "I'll be spanked and grounded for a year." Mr. Whitemouth frowned. "It's fun to juggle with these. I want you to try it." I pushed the box away. "I can't. I'll get in trouble. Knives aren't safe to just throw in the air." Mr. Whitemouth's frown deepened into a scowl. He took the box of knives and slid under my bed, remaining there for the rest of the day. I began to wonder how often he was under me. I started having trouble sleeping after that. Mr. Whitemouth often woke me up at night, saying he put a real trampoline under the window. A big one that I couldn't see in the dark. I always declined and tried to go back to sleep, but Mr. Whitemouth persisted. Sometimes he stayed by my side until early morning, encouraging me to jump. He wasn't so fun to play with anymore. My mother came to see me one morning and told me I had her permission to walk around outside. She thought the fresh air would be good for me, especially after being confined in my room for so long. Ecstatic, I put on my sneakers and trotted out to the back porch, yearning for the feeling of sun on my face. Mr. Whitemouth was waiting for me. "I have something to show you." "No, wait. I have something I want you to see," he said. I must have given him a weird look, because then he said, "It's safe, I promise." I followed him to the beginning of a deer trail, which ran through the woods behind the house. "This is an important path," he explained. "I've had a lot of friends about your age. When they were ready, I took them down this path to a special place. You aren't ready yet, but one day I hope to take you there." I returned to the house, wondering what kind of place lay beyond that trail. 2 weeks after I met Mr. Whitemouth, the last load of our things had been packed into the moving truck. I would be in the cab of that truck, sitting next to my father for the long drive to Pennsylvania. I considered telling Mr. Whitemouth that I would be leaving, but even at 5 years old, I was beginning to suspect that perhaps the creature's intentions were not to my benefit, despite what he said otherwise. For this reason, I decided to keep my departure a secret. My father and I were in the truck at 4 a.m. He was hoping to make it to Pennsylvania by lunchtime tomorrow with the help of an endless supply of coffee and a 6-pack of energy drinks. He seemed more like a man who was about to run a marathon rather than one who was about to spend 2 days sitting still. "Early enough for you?" he asked. I nodded and placed my head against the window, hoping for some sleep before the sun came up. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder. "This is the last move, son. I promise I know it's hard for you, as sick as you've been, but once Daddy gets promoted, we can settle down and you can make friends. I opened my eyes as we backed out of the driveway. I saw Mr. Whitemouth's silhouette in my bedroom window. He stood motionless until the truck was about to turn onto the main road. He gave a pitiful little wave goodbye, steak knife in his hand. I didn't wave back. Meow. Meow. Years later, I returned to New Vineyard. The piece of land our house once stood upon was empty except for the foundation, as the house burned down a few years after my family left. Out of curiosity, I followed the deer trail that Mr. Whitemouth had shown me. Part of me expected him to jump from behind a tree and scare the living bejesus out of me, but I felt that Mr. Whitemouth was gone, somehow tied to the house that no longer existed. The trail ended at New Vineyard Memorial Cemetery. I noticed many of the tombstones belonged to children. Da-da-da. And that was Mr. Widemouth and the Russian sleep experiment. Just 2 creepypastas I distinctly remembered. Yeah, I think those were both pretty fucked in their own way. I think we can all agree that those were pretty, absolutely terrifying in their own special way. I don't think we can find anything quite as horrible as that one. Juggle with knives. Some people can do it. You know, there are people who juggle with knives and chainsaws and all sorts of things. Yeah, it certainly sounds safe. Now, industry professionals juggle with knives and chainsaws and stuff like that. Ludicrous. See, I think we're missing the point here of the story. I think Mr. Widemouth was an evil spirit connected to that house that killed kids. Think about it. Anyways. I think that's it for tonight, guys. Yeah, the house was bad. It had bad juju attached to it. Anyways, guys. Thank you all for joining me here tonight for this creepypasta reading of the Russian sleep experiment and Mr. Widemouth. A few other people have read these stories before, and I'm just one of them. At least something in the house was bad. Yeah, maybe the house itself wasn't bad, but there was definitely there were some bad things there. Something that had a particular fondness for killing the weak and vulnerable, clearly. I truly do not believe we'll ever find a story as horrible and terrifying as that one story we read that one time, that I will never mention the name of again. Of all the things I've forgotten in my life, I truly wish I could forget how that story went. Good night. Thank you. As always, please enjoy the rest of your time, whatever time it might be. Yes, we don't speak of the evil. The evil will be contained forever. yes, you guys have an awesome possum time, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Please enjoy the stories. As I said before, the website is nightscribe.co. And please remember to stay out of small spaces you can get caught in. Stay out of car or engine compartments. Stay out of traffic. Stay hydrated. Stay out of some possums. Good night.